Thank you for staying with us on Citizen Weekend. I am now joined virtually, as promised, by Don Dea, who joins us from Cape Town. He is the CEO of the Pan-African Lawyers Union. Also joined from Kampala by Dr. Fred Mbide, Dr. Mukasa Fred Mbide. And he's not only a two-term, he served previously as a two-term member of the East African Legislative Assembly. He's also contesting a county parliamentary seat in the January 15th elections that will take place in Uganda, presidential and parliamentary elections. And he is also the deputy president of the Democratic Party in Uganda. I'll start with you, Dr. Mbide. What is the political environment?
Thank you.
Karibu sana. Perhaps we can begin with you telling us what the political environment is like in Uganda. You're still in the campaign period?
Yes, indeed. And we are running around the country. We are in the trenches. We are doing whatever we can in order to make sure that we bring shocking news by January.
You said shocking news?
Yes.
What would constitute shocking news in your view?
Because, of course, when the competition is in place, you can imagine that we have got naysayers and we have got those that have obviously worked out to make sure that they are carrying the day. In Uganda, I think we can say there is some bit of election that you can think about. Of course, in other areas, for example, located at presidential level, it is a bit of a charade of some sort. We can see, of course, social media warlord is also garnering support here and there. And we are also seeing on the ground a lot of people doing whatever they can. But I can tell you that in Uganda, there is democracy at parliamentary level. At the presidential level, it is some bit of a pantomime. But I can safely tell you that we are going to deliver some bit of 60% of democracy for Uganda by January 15th.
You say 60% of democracy. I don't know, as the CEO of the Pan-African Lawyers Union, are you as optimistic, Don?
Optimism is something that becomes me, but Olive, because I'm talking to you on the day on which it happened, let me first start by sending my condolences and my sympathies to the family and friends of Honorable Cyrus Shakalaga Kwajirongo, who apparently we lost earlier on today morning. I was a college student during the YK 92 moment, so I've got lots to say about that, but I really send my condolences to the family. Now, as for Fred, Mukasa Mbide is a man that I really respect. We've worked with him on Pan-Africanist and Pan-East Africanist issues for almost the last 10 years, and I was his lawyer in an important case at the East African Court of Justice. So I commend him to the people of Uganda. I can't say the same about the head of state, but I can say this about Fred. I think he will be a useful addition. Stuff like that are actually the causes for optimism for me, Olive. When I look at the young people of East Africa and the way they're becoming more active, more proactive, more networked, both online and offline. So I do have optimism. If you look at the young people, for instance, of Tanzania in the recent past, after the election, refusing to be divided along religious lines and coming up with what they call the Wakrislamu movement, that we're both Christians as well as Muslims, and you'll not divide us on religious lines. If you look at the young Kenyans last year refusing to be divided along tribal lines, if you look at the kind of solidarity that Africans from Kenya, Uganda, Ghana, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, and so on have shown for our Tanzanian colleagues over the last month, following on the solidarity that was expressed around the Free Bobi Wine movement, around solidarity for Sudan, around solidarity of my other clients and friends, Agatha Tuhaire and Boniface Mwangi, when they were violated by the Samia regime earlier on this year. If you look at the boycott of musicians who support dictators or who support oppressive regimes, then despite the challenges that we're facing, I think there's a lot of optimism. And finally, if you look at the turning point that happened with the Tanzanian election, where the independent mechanism mechanisms of both the African Union and the Southern African SADC, they have flipped the script and said we will not validate blatant electoral theft. So much as there's a lot to be said about, I think there's also quite a basis for optimism.
All right, I'll come back to you, Dr. Mbide, and I'm looking at a statement that was issued by the Ugandan Electoral Commission, and this was in response to violent confrontations in Gulu on Saturday, the 6th of December 2025. And it states the commission condemns the violent scene surrounding the candidate Robert Chagulanyi's campaign rally while in Gulu on the 6th of December 2025. I know you talked about, Uganda will deliver 60% democracy come January 15th and the staggered elections thereafter. But is that good enough?
It is certainly foolhardy for anyone to believe that at presidential level we are going to have that kind of democracy that we contemplated under the laws of Uganda, and of course giving the opportunities that are equal, both opposition and incumbency. Of course, envisaged under even Article 6D to the Charter to create for the establishment of the East African Community. I feel there is yet what should be delivered by incumbents in East Africa. We had thought that we had arrived, but they are messing up, of course, the outcomes of nations that thought we are heading towards even integration. Now, where we are, it is actually becoming laughable. In proper English, it would be chichi for anyone to organize an election, but expect that that election should not be contested. At the end of the day, you want now a declaration to be done in such a way that the winner that has come out of a process that is marred by of course, kind of interventions by the military. The Electoral Commission, what it has done, I would, in my opinion, want to count it as part of the second process for challenging the event that we can obtain discount by those that shall be declared losers of an election. We have.
All right, Dr. Mbide, I'm so sorry, we appear to have lost you there, but Don, as we try and reconnect, we've seen running themes across the three countries. We've seen in Tanzania and Uganda leading opposition figures detained on charges of treason. We've seen violence across the three. In Kenya, though, we don't have, not to my knowledge, an opposition figure detained, but we have seen repeatedly a situation where the opposition is, joins forces with the government. So essentially, do we have an opposition in play apart from the united opposition, but those that were elected as the minority are part of government? We see violence because we've seen in Tanzania the protests, in Uganda we've seen the campaign violence, in Kenya with the by-elections observers noted the violence in areas including Mbeere North, in Malava. So we are seeing running themes across. So as much as you say, you're encouraged by the youth, you're encouraged by statements such as the AU and SADC released in response to the Tanzanian election of 29th of October. Are you not concerned by these trends?
I'm concerned by very many things, Olive. And one of the things I'm concerned about is the electoral violence that we're seeing, the normalization of electoral violence. And this evokes in me, the spirit to invoke the spirit of my sister, my elder sister, Rosalind Doreen Adhiambo Dede, who until earlier this year was the chair of the Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, which is our national human rights institution. She stood in her time and in her term for the rights of citizens. You would want to ask, you're asking Fred Mukasa Mbide about what's happening in Uganda. Where's the Uganda Human Rights Commission? We were talking about Tanzania earlier. Tanzania has a Commission for Human Rights and Good Governance, SHRAG, which is headed by a judge who's a friend of mine. Why are they totally mute as to the issues that we're seeing? Rosalind, in her time as chair of the Kenya National Commission, would be at the front line of addressing these issues head on, preparing reports, issuing orders, and so on. So what really I think we need, Olive, is not so much about is there electoral violence or not. We know there is. Amnesty International, I think, has just done a very thorough report about political violence in Kenya, the political economy of violence in Kenya, and so on. It's about accountability. It's about accountability and asking the institutions that we have created that what are you doing about what is blatantly going on before our faces. When you look at, for instance, leave alone the violence, when you look at the blatant misuse of the criminal justice system in Tanzania, in Kenya, in Uganda, this blatant misuse of treason charges, terrorism charges, cops with balaclavas and so on, you want to ask the Chief Justice of Uganda and the Chief Justice of Tanzania, are you in charge of the courts or the police are? You want to ask the Director of Public Prosecutions, when you see, for instance, in the courts in Kisutu, when Tundu Lissu is being arraigned and the police completely take over the court and they decide that the court is full and people need to be removed, you want to ask the DPP, are you in charge of prosecutions or the police are? Countries like Kenya that are privileged enough to have a modern constitution, an independent policing oversight authority, a National Police Service Commission, you want to ask them who is in charge. So it's a thing about more how we get accountability, legal accountability, but also political and social accountability, which again, as I say, the young people, especially in Kenya, are very good at exacting. Social accountability, social opprobrium.
All right, we'll come back to the question of accountability. But first, let me come back to you, Dr. Mbide. What lessons do you think there are for Uganda, having looked at the mini polls in Kenya and looked at what happened in Tanzania on the 29th of October?
What happened in Tanzania, in my opinion, I did not, because I have looked at when you look at the analysis by Professor Bob Dole on free and fair elections, particularly the kind of analysis that is given, the kind of provisions that can lead to an election being adjudged free or fair.
All right, sorry about that. We'll come back to you with that question, Dr. Mbide. But Don, speaking of accountability, despite the African Union, SADC raising concerns about ballot stuffing, the environment before the October 29th Tanzanian election not being free and fair, we still have Samia Suluhu Hassan in office. So what does that say about accountability where elections are concerned in East Africa?
I think the journey to real democratic governance is a journey that will be one for progressive realization. We will not achieve everything that we want in a day. I think that the situation in Tanzania has presented a real dilemma for the African Union and for the SADC, and sometimes dilemmas are good, because our leaders are quick to see a military coup d'etat as a constitutional change of government. But when you look at, for instance, the law of the AU and the law of SADC, and constitutional change of government is both a military coup d'etat as well as a civilian coup. So I think this is the first time where we're seeing independent mechanisms of the African Union and of SADC saying there has been a civilian coup. So we are now engaging the AU and we're engaging SADC, and we know other people are, in terms of what are the implications of the statements that were given, and can it be business as usual? So I think much as for now, we do have a de facto head of state in Tanzania, I think there are many, many questions on the table, and those questions are being asked. And I think this will reflect also on how voting day will be conducted in Uganda on 15th January, because I think there's a Rubicon that has been crossed. I think that any responsible, respectable African woman or man that is put in charge of an African election observation mission now has to, at the very minimum, meet the standards that was met by those that held the electoral observation missions for Uganda, for Tanzania, both on the part of the AU and on the part of SADC. So I think we are all being judged. I think something else that really needs to be looked at that was more blatant in the case of Uganda as opposed to Kenya and Tanzania. Last year, when the young people of Kenya went onto the streets and President William Ruto decided to deploy the military, in contravention of the constitution and the law of Kenya, by the way, because there's a very clear legal provisions in terms of when the military are deployed to civilian circumstances. You could see the military acted professionally, and I therefore totally congratulate the Kenyan military. Same thing happened in the period after 29th October, when President Samia Suluhu Hassan deployed the Tanzanian military into the streets. They acted with professionalism, with courtesy, with regard to the rights of the people. They protected the people and so on. And I therefore totally congratulate and applaud the Tanzanian military. Now, when we go to the Ugandan military, and the way the Ugandan military has allowed itself to be misused and abused in civilian political affairs over the last 10 years, 20 years, but especially the last 10 years, what we saw in the run-up to the election in 2021, the voting day in 2021, I think we need a series of very serious court-martials of Ugandan military officials, starting with the chief of the defense forces, who apparently calls himself or was made by his father general. We need a serious court-martial of the kinds of things that the chief of defense forces does and openly tells us that he does.
All right, I'll bring in, because you've spoken about Uganda, I'll bring in Dr. Mbide now. So perhaps you can just react to what Dawn has stated, but also back to the question of, what lessons can Uganda take from the Kenya and Tanzania situations? Dr. Mbide, did you hear me?
Yes, I can now get you.
Great, go ahead.
Of course, the status of the internet where I am right now, it's a far district called Mubende. It is becoming ignominious, the manner in which I am interacting with Citizen TV. Let me hope I can conclude this conversation.
Go ahead.
Uganda's election started on a very peaceful framework. And all institutions of state, including security, had definitely agreed, and we had unanimity in terms of holding a peaceful election. What is now developing is something that, like Don has said, needs to be, first of all, studied, condemned, and we must have, of course, all of the perpetrators brought to book. It is the Electoral Commission under our laws that can invite any extra security measures in an election. And where they come out to condemn what has been done, in my opinion, I think we must move as fast as practicable in terms of bringing to book all the perpetrators of the wrongs, the antagonism that has been orchestrated against opposition. In Uganda, the law provides against it, and we definitely must have to bring them to book. However, we also now need to understand one major thing, that in the totality of the East African community leaders must understand that it is incumbent upon them to respect, going forward, what our countries should look like. When you find an election organized in such a way that no voting takes place, when you find the establishment of electoral commissions being the handiwork of incumbents that are seeking to rerun and maintain their hold on office, then you find that it is laughable. All the provisions of our laws notwithstanding, including obviously the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, you look at the laws, they are actually brilliant, beautiful, and in my opinion, if implemented, East Africa will be a proper El Dorado for politics, for East Africans. What is happening, however, is something that we must worry about. They say when those chasing a thief return without him, then the meaning is that he has outrun them. It is beginning to look like East Africans are in for a raw deal. Our current leaders are failing to make sure that for posterity we can organize our own countries for the better.
All right.
That is something that all of us need to come together. In fact, for us as lawyers, we are willing to do whatever it takes going forward to make sure there must be a redress in terms of whatever has been violated. all the violations must be answered if we are to avoid the kind of buzzwords that are coming in, the military coups d'etat that are actually bedeviling of course, the African North. We must be in position to avoid them by providing democracy for those that have got alternative opinions on who must lead them.
All right. I'll invite you, Don, to have the last word. I know you said you were encouraged earlier by the engagement of the youth. Africa has one of the most of the... I know it's a continent that has a very youthful population, but when you look at the demographic of the leaders, and I was looking at a piece that Al Jazeera did, and they talked about some countries where you have 90-year-olds, 80-year-olds, which is quite different from the average age of the person on the continent. And I'm not trying to be ageist here, but why don't we see this, engagement translated on the ballot in Kenya, for instance, even registering for, the continuous voter registration exercise? The turnout was quite dismal. Don,
I think there are a number of things. Yeah, I heard you, Olive. I'm sorry, I hope my internet didn't let me down, but I heard you, Don. I think there's a direct correlation between the total closing of civic and democratic space and the age of the geriatric that runs the country. If you look at Equatorial Guinea and Obiang, if you look at Obiang Gwemba Masogo, if you look at Cameroon under Paul Biya, if you look at Abidjan under Alassane Ouattara, it is the closing of political and diplomatic space that guarantees these geriatrics in office. In most of the rest of the continent, there's a direct correlation. So if you go to, for instance, Botswana and you look at Duma Boko, it's literally a person of my generation, and so on. So you're not going to have 90-year-olds or 80-year-olds in power except in exceptional circumstances which exist. Now, the main thing is what is the quality of the election that we had and what was the quality of intervention, as Fred Mukasambide has said, by the National Election Management Body, by the National Human Rights Institution, by the judiciaries. In countries like Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal, and so on, you saw the judiciary being completely complicit, like the judiciary in Tanzania, in locking out candidates from the ballot. So that in the end, then there's no possibility of a free and fair election. There's no possibility of electoral competition. So it's the quality of the constitutions you look at. And my final word, Olive, is then the point I've been making about PAQ, Pan-Africanism quotient. That each of us, whether in politics, whether in the bureaucracy, whether in civil society, whether in the bar, whether in business, like Aliko Dangote is, we should be judged on our Pan-Africanism. Don't just talk the talk, also walk the walk. So we come up with criteria where we say, are you really a Pan-Africanist? Or are you an agent, a real agent of foreign masters, or people in the Gulf, or people in the global north and so on, who are being used as this generation's house niggers to fix the other people? What can we say that you have done for the people in reality? Chief justices, judges, people being elected to understandable commissions of inquiry or fact-finding and so on, each of us must be judged on our real track record. And that will be my parting shot.
All right, thank you for speaking to us this evening. We've had joining us from Kampala, Dr. Fred Mbide. We've also been joined by Don Dea, who is the CEO of the Pan-African Lawyers Union. Dr. Mbide is the Deputy President of the Democratic Party in Uganda, two-time serving member of the Yala East African Legislative Assembly, as well as a contestant in parliamentary elections in Uganda in the January 15th election. So we take a break on Citizen Weekend, but we do continue on the other side.